Hello. Thank you for inviting me to be here today. As an honorary member of Edinburgh. I've come from Fife, up the road. And yeah, here today to talk about reality. It's kind of weird when you get given a theme, but it's quite an interesting one to think about. A slight amount of pressure to take on a big topic like that. And it's first thing in the morning as well, so hopefully you're awake enough to stay with me as we go through the presentation. But yeah, I was kind of thinking how I'd tackle reality, and I'm a designer, and I've been doing this for kind of 18 years, so I think there's a degree of me being able to talk about the reality of what it's like to be a designer, and specifically to talk about the reality of what it's like to be a designer for Tom Pigeon. But before I kind of get into that, I started thinking about this idea of what reality is, and I think that the reality of that situation is that there's no such thing as reality. It's kind of an amalgamation of our memories and our assumptions and our values and our belief systems. But what we perceive as reality is kind of different for all of us, and I think that's quite interesting as designers because quite often the challenge for a designer is either in understanding what people perceive to be their realities or in trying to kind of convey a certain idea or set of realities to people. So in that sense, the idea of what reality is kind of critical to what designers do. I particularly like this quote. This is from a guy called Adrian Forty, who wrote a book that kind of really informed my design thinking when I was a design student, called Objects of Design. And he says, design has the capacity to cast myths into an enduring, solid and tangible form so that they seem to be reality itself. So I'll let this sink in, because when I chatted to people in the studio about this, they looked and they were like, what? But I think what he's saying really is that design is kind of like a fiction, or it's like storytelling. And when we design, we kind of create a version of reality. So, although we don't really think an awful lot about what the name Tom Pigeon means, it obviously does mean something to people. And I know from chatting to a couple of people before that people have this kind of quite a clear idea of what it means, and we maybe don't have quite as clear idea as other people do, which is quite good, I think. But the reality of the situation is that we are making these things that kind of have a set of ideas or principles embodied in them, and it's maybe not always as clear to us as it is to everyone else what they are, but that they exist. So I think today what I'd like to do is, it's like a therapy session, isn't it? Today what I want to do is talk about what those ideas and principles might be, and a bit about the reality of what it's like in the studio, and also unpick a little bit about the reality of how we got to where we are now. So that's kind of the heavy bit out of the way. So the studio is called Tom Pigeon, but the reality is there is no Tom. It's not me, it doesn't exist. Tom is Kirsty and I. So this is my wife, Kirsty. We founded it together in 2014. We're a creative studio based on the east coast of Fife. Our studio at the moment is just on the edge of a field in the middle of nowhere. We kind of design simple, crafted, affordable things, and we try and make them with care, and we hope that people enjoy them. Sometimes we get chatting to interesting people. One of the luxuries of what we do at the moment is we kind of get to pick and choose whether we work with people or not, because most of what we produce is just our own work. But occasionally we meet really interesting people with really good projects, and that's kind of exciting because it gets the creative juices flowing. But people often ask us kind of why we're called Tom Pigeon. I don't really have a very good answer for that. It's a pseudonym, and one of the conversations we had a lot about it at the time was that we couldn't see many examples of kind of pseudonyms in design. There's a company called Crisp and Finn in London, which is another husband and wife duo, and they're really nice people. And we met them and we were like, okay, if they can do it, that's a good start. And then the only other person we could think of was Le Corbusier, because that was a pseudonym. And it's like, well, if he can do it, then we can do it. And I think what's interesting about pseudonyms is that they kind of give you a little bit of anonymity, so you can hide behind it. So maybe as a 40-something husband and wife team living in Fife, Tom Pigeon gives us a degree of an alter ego. I kind of like to think about it as the better version of ourselves. You know, Tom's the kind of guy that you want to be. You'd want to have a pint with him in the pub. And it also, as well as giving you that anonymity, it kind of allows you a little bit of creative freedom. Because it's not necessarily doing what you would do, it's kind of doing what Tom would do. And the more we do it, the more we get a clear idea of kind of who Tom is and what Tom thinks. God, this really is like a therapy session. And it's also a reflection of that it's a partnership. So we kind of talked about just putting stuff under Kirsty's name, but it felt like it was going to be much better to have it under this kind of like independent name. So this is us anyway in our kind of minimal white studio, but obviously this is just the reality that we're presenting to you, because to either side of this is just piles of rubbish and, you know, boxes piled up and stuff. So we kind of edit and curate the realities that we show people all the time. For example, on our website. So this is the main way that we kind of communicate with people, I guess, is online. And you can see that we do a mixture of print, jewellery, stationery, and then we have a kind of source department where we buy in other people's work that we really like. And as well as the website, you know, the other platform that we use a lot is Instagram. So this is audience participation time. I asked you in the warm-up kind of how real you think a social media profile should be. So I'm kind of interested if anyone's got opinions on that in the audience. Anyone going to speak? Yeah? You might have to shout.
I think personally, as long as it's locked down, it can be as real as you like, but work profile, it should be the good version of you.
The good version of you.
The version you'd like people to think is you.
What about anybody else? And do you think it's bad, or do you think it's good?
I think some platforms are good, some are bad.
Cool. Thank you both for participating. I mean, Kirsty and I both really like Instagram. I'm dreadful on Twitter, and we don't really stretch an awful lot beyond that. And we like Instagram, you know, primarily because it's very visual, and I find it really useful for curating inspiration and kind of finding and uncovering other people who are really interesting. And I have Instagram friends who I've never met in person, but I feel kind of quite close to. But it's definitely curated. And, you know, it's just a version of reality. So this is, you know, us with our idyllic field and our idyllic walk in the park. And obviously that's not the full reality of our lives, but it's not meant to be either. You know, this is not Kirsty's Instagram feed, it's not my Instagram feed, it's Tom's Instagram feed. And so it's a version of our studio life, but it's not the full picture. But, you know, it's real in the sense that we post about the stuff that excites us and inspires us and the stuff that we're enjoying that's around us. This is kind of us now and in the position that we're at, and what I'd really like to do before we talk about some of the work and the thinking that goes into the work is just talk about how we got here. This next bit's a bit painful. So we'll kind of rewind back 24 years, back to 1992. Oh, it's awfully big. So this is Kirsty and I when we met, which is on our foundation course in Liverpool. So I'm 18 years old here. This is obviously a classy evening because there's a kind of Strongbow and a bottle of Malibu just up the side of this desk. But I mean, aside from the fact this is where Kirsty and I met, you know, this is probably the start of Tom as well, in that it was on that foundation course that I started to learn some of the kind of principles that underpin my design thinking. In terms of the course itself, it kind of put me off art school for 5 years. But Kirsty went off and did a design degree, and I got a job in a supermarket. When I was working in the supermarket, this is kind of what Liverpool looked like at the time. It had this amazing club scene, so it was just like when all the clubs kind of kicked off around Britain, and Liverpool had Cream, which is like the biggest club in the world at the time, and had loads of cheap rents, loads of startups, and so I opened a shop, which seemed like a good idea at the time, that we kind of sold stuff to do with clubs, like clothes and things like that, and ran it into the ground. Didn't realise there was a recession on, or that I was completely ill-equipped to do accounts. So I lost 10 grand in 6 months. I went back to working in supermarkets. Meanwhile, Kirsty went and got a design education, graduated and started working as a designer. We've moved on a little bit. 5 years later, she's out there being a designer. I'm still working in a shop, and I got fed up, so I went to do my design degree. And I went through clearing, so it wasn't very glamorous. I kind of just last minute panicked and went through clearing, and met these two guys anyway on a product design course, and they were really switched on and very similar to me, and we kept talking about how Liverpool needed a really good design agency and how we were going to do all this amazing stuff. And we did. We met a local graphic design company, and we said to them, look, we want to take your brand, because it's a cool brand that they had, because they were graphics guys, and we want to make some products, and we're going to stick your brand on it. And they're like, yeah, that sounds like a good idea. So we had an afternoon in the pub, and at the end of the afternoon, they basically said they wanted to set up a company with us. So it's like, okay, that's great. Gave us free desk space for a year, and they just fed us clients. It was very, very philanthropic of them, and everything really that we've achieved is down to that initial afternoon in the pub, because they had these print clients who had things like interior projects that they wanted doing for them, and so us as product design students could obviously design anything, and so they just fed us these interesting projects. So this is us kind of doing up our first proper studio. This was like the kind of beer store for one of the cool bars in Liverpool, and so that's stacks of beer in the background that we had to kind of clear out of the studio. But the reality of this situation is I was still in my second year of university when we set the business up. So there's a great Paul Arden quote where he says, it's not how good you are, it's how good you want to be. And I think that's fundamental to everything I've ever done, is having a belief that you can do it without necessarily having the skills to do it, because you can kind of pick the skills up along the way as long as you've got the kind of gumption and the confidence to have a crack at doing it. So at the end of our second year, my second year at university, we built this sushi kind of noodle bar. And it was amazing, making this real, tangible stuff and kind of bringing it to life. It's a great job to be a designer. I think it's kind of like very transformative, and that aspect that you kind of create these realities is really exciting. And you learn an awful lot when you do this kind of stuff. It's great to work with people. One of the things that I would recommend is, if there's things that you don't like doing, find someone who likes doing those things and work with them. So we were very lucky with the team that we had. Back then, that there was different people who wanted to do different things, and when we came together, it was a lot stronger than just working individually. But you also realise that the reality of like a design agency is that it's not just about creative; it's about managing people and managing time and managing expectations. And bad things happen all the time. Things go wrong, and I think the main thing that I picked up from it wasn't so much things going wrong that mattered; it was how you dealt with them. And having that positive outlook in terms of how you dealt with them generally mitigated all of the bad stuff. So we learned our craft, and if I fast forward, by the time I got to kind of 2013, I was kind of doing kind of weird R&D projects with intersection of kind of like design and technology. And one of them was picked up for Designs of the Year exhibition at the Design Museum. So this was kind of like pretty much highlight of the certainly creative highlight of the work that I've been doing up until that point. But it didn't kind of quite feel right. You know, Kirsty and I had moved to Scotland a few years previously. I was travelling backwards and forwards to Liverpool and London, and it wasn't quite what I wanted from life. I had this, I was going to put on a Spanish accent here, but I think I'll not. But I've got this Spanish mate, and he once said to me that in Spain they kind of work to live, whereas in Britain everyone lives to work. And it just kind of used to play on a tape in the back of my head. And I wanted more control over the work that I did, and a bit more freedom. It was a big part of why we moved up to Scotland in the first place. So back in 2006, we'd moved up to Cellardike on the east coast of Fife. And there was all these kind of cool houses and buildings with these interesting spaces in them. So our house had this kind of derelict fisherman's net loft in it. And by 2011, Kirsty had kind of transformed that into her studio. So, you know, she was teaching at the time, but she'd started kind of designing and making things, lino printing, stationery, jewellery. And it was kind of like a hobby that slowly started to turn into a business. And she was selling online, moved from platforms like Etsy to having her own website, and created this company called Lovely Pigeon. And Kirsty has this great capacity to kind of just get things done. She's slightly fearless in that way, and I think I'm a bit of a, you know, I like things to be just right before they go out, which kind of can slow things down sometimes, and she likes to just kind of get things out there and then deal with what happens afterwards. So she was very good at doing that. And this was all kind of done on a shoestring, and over the years, it moved from this very handcrafted aesthetic towards something that's a little bit more finished, a little bit simpler. And so this is kind of 2013, so I'm making postcards that play music in that kind of weird postcard player device, and she's making these kind of very nice abstract pieces of jewellery. And I'm starting to chip in a little bit with my product design experience as well, and looking at new materials, so working with things like sheet materials, sheet metals, Formica, and also having that confidence to work with other suppliers. So started to work with screen printers in Glasgow and foiling companies in the northwest. And by this point, we're kind of really starting to feel like we knew what it was we wanted to do. And I'm looking at Kirsty's work and I'm thinking, that's really good. I really like that, and I wish I was doing that. But you know, it took time to get to this point. The reality is, it took us 7 years from having moved there to kind of get to a point where we were producing this stuff that we felt really represented what we wanted to do. And yeah, I was looking at it and we thought this was something that we should do together. You know, we should turn it into a business. This is the business plan. It's kind of terrifying. I don't know why we just worked off this A3 piece of paper, but we did. We honestly worked off this for months. And had all the finances on it. So yeah, that was the foundation. And I think it's important, I think list making is really, really important, and kind of putting down the kind of vision, because once you've put it down there, it makes it much more tangible and much more likely to become a reality. And it doesn't matter whether it's neat or tidy, you know, it just matters that you put it down on a piece of paper. The studio being completely rationalised, all the folky stuff removed, and turned into this kind of minimal workspace. But we ran out of space. 2014, Christmas 2014 was really busy for us, and the stuff just took over the whole house. It was in the kitchen, it was in the living room, it was in the dining room, and the spare bedrooms. So we moved out. This is what the studio looks like at the moment. It's kind of like a temporary mess. And we employed some people, which was really good. Saved our marriage. This is the next studio, which is being built at the moment in a converted kind of dairy. And it's huge, kind of scarily big, but also quite exciting as well. So hopefully we'll be in there by August. And that kind of brings us up to now. So I said at the start that Tom Pigeon's a pseudonym, and it's hard to kind of break down what it is. We don't really think of it as a brand too much, and we've both got different takes on what it means. But you know, I think there's principles that underpin what we do, and I think it's basically these three things. Everything we do, we try and keep it as simple as possible. By crafted, what I mean is that we're really interested in making things where the people that make them with care and a bit of love and a bit of passion. I'm not so bothered about whether they use machines or not, because I think that's kind of a bit of a reductive way to think about craft. But I do care that they really want the thing to be excellent. And it matters to us that we make things that are affordable and not elitist. Now, none of that means that we won't ever do something really elaborate or mass manufactured or really expensive, but these seem to be the principles that guide us on a daily basis. And I really enjoy working with younger people as well, and like working with craftspeople who are starting to kind of find their way, so that we can kind of just put something back into that ecosystem. And it's interesting when you work with different people. Well, I thought it might be interesting just to have a quick look at a few projects. So these were rulers that we made when we launched. Now I knew from all the work that I'd done with Uniform that design is always this balance between time, quality, and cost. These rulers took too long to make. We couldn't get them to the right level of quality, and they were too expensive. So they're a complete commercial failure. But I think they're an aesthetic success, and they're kind of indicative of a lot of the aesthetic principles that underpin our work as well. So I think broadly it kind of falls into that Japanese aesthetic of kind of wabi-sabi, where we kind of recognise that things are never going to be perfect and maybe enjoy the flaws that are inherent in production or materials. So in this sense, we used unvarnished, unfinished kind of copper and brass, which tarnishes over time. And it's the same on the jewellery as well. So it builds up a patina, and you can see that it gets messy and you see fingerprints on there, but that's kind of part of the charm of it. And it's also a kind of commitment towards kind of austerity and simplicity. And I think the same thing is evident in graphics work as well. So I created a typeface, and you could buy these as kind of A3 prints, which is quite an undertaking in terms of production. But it has a kind of nostalgic feel, and it was derived from various different things, but this particularly stuck in my head, which was a picture I found of an old poster advertising a cinema in Anstruther, the village kind of where we live. And I think it's important to recognise that I don't like this type because it's old and because it's nostalgic. I like it because it's clean and bold and impactful, and because it's packed full of kind of quirky irregularities, like this kind of funny exclamation mark and things. And so we took that through, and it would be really tempting to kind of distress these prints to make them look more nostalgic and more old-fashioned. But that's the kind of thing that we're not very interested in. We wanted it to feel clean and modern. And so it has this kind of shadow, which is made up of like a digital square pixel, halftone. And these are digitally printed, which enables us to kind of produce 26 different prints at a relatively low cost for people to buy, and we can produce them in short runs, so it's low cost for us to produce them. And then more recently, we've worked with a printmaker called Tom Mayo, who laser cuts wood and then uses letterpress print to print it. And so we've done a set of numbers, and these are more expensive, but they're still affordable because his process, because he laser cuts the letterpress blocks, is relatively inexpensive. And these are really nice because they show up the irregularities that come through from the printmaking process. There's natural marks and kind of inconsistencies on them. And this is my most recent print collection. So I wanted to kind of produce a set of prints that were inspired by Mediterranean islands and architecture and kind of shadows and light. It was sort of to do with the kind of that feeling that you get sometimes when you're in like a sunny square somewhere exotic, and you're never quite sure what's behind the corner. Like kind of don't look now sort of Venice thing, where there's something dark happening in the corner of the square. And I think with the way that I work, I start with some inspiration. So I was kind of interested by kind of Tom Eckersley and like early 20th century printing. And I started playing with all these distressed marks, and Kirsty was like, no distress, it must be clean lines. And I was kind of interested by the kind of surrealist stuff. And so kind of developed a set of rules that led the project. It's like very consistent baselines, all the angles are kind of consistent, the shadow width is the same on all of these prints. And the way that I work is I kind of just create this set of rules, and by the end of the project, the rules have basically dictated the aesthetic of the project, so I don't have to think. I just follow the rules that I've kind of set for myself. And again, there's this kind of like digital half-tone dither that's brought in there, so and kind of these quite interesting print overlays. So it's a bit of a celebration of what you can do with the print process, but also a reflection of the fact that it's designed with digital tools. Now, all of this talk, obviously, you're kind of getting my take on Tom Pigeon, as opposed to Kirsty's. So to address the balance, this is Kirsty's latest print collection. And she works in a completely different way to the way that I work. So she has no rules, completely different process. She just kind of does it. It's very artistic, and her stuff sells far better than mine does. So I have no kind of high horse about the right or the wrong way. And I think that probably what we share in common is that to be successful as a creator, I think you have to trust yourself. Whatever your process is, you have to believe in it. And as a married couple working together, one of the things that we have to do, and I guess it's the reality for all partnerships, is that you need to kind of learn to disagree, happily disagree, and compromise. This print collection is one of the few collections that we've actually worked on really closely, creatively together, sort of bouncing ideas backwards and forwards between the two of us. And it's actually kind of one of our most successful projects, I think, both aesthetically and commercially. And I know it looks like these are very simple, but it took a lot of work to get them to this level of simplicity, and there's a lot of arguing about the details and these line weights and the thicknesses and stuff like that. So I think it's important to kind of learn to compromise. So the reality as I get older is that I realise that there isn't this kind of right or wrong way to design, there's just your own way. And I get a bit hacked off these days by these kind of lists of design, lists of good design and bad design. I think it's all bollocks. It's like, you just kind of work out what you want to be, whether you're a craftsperson, a maker, an artist, a designer, and then stick to your guns and plough that path. And things will change, you've got to allow things to change as well. You don't need to be the same designer that you were when you start out. You can change over the years and become something different. But to sum up, I thought I'd just go back to those points that I think make up the reality of how Tom Pigeon became Tom Pigeon. So I think you need to make space. Physical space creates mental space as well. So I think studios are really important. They're spaces to have dreams, write them down, make plans, and then make them happen. Once you break them down into achievable steps, it's relatively easy to make anything happen. You just need to break it down into small enough steps so that it's achievable. Be nice helps to be nice to people. Sounds like a cliche, but it's true. Kirsty's very good. She's much nicer than me at being nice to people. So you work with people who are good at doing the things that you can't do, and trust yourself. Thank you.
For that. Before I take, we've got time for some questions from the audience, but while you gather your thoughts, I like that notion of you can be as best as you want to be. It's kind of the aim of where you want to go next, and you'll pick up the skills along the way. So for Tom Pigeon, what does Tom Pigeon want to be?
I was chatting to somebody earlier about this, and I think we're in a weird position at the moment because we're kind of doing everything we want to do in a way. Part of part of the downside of not thinking about it as a brand is that we maybe don't know exactly what it is we are. And so we kind of just do what we want to do when we want to do it. And I think both of us are keen to do more ambitious art, if that's not too pretentious a thing to say. Maybe do some things that are less about us selling things and some more things that are about us making things that aren't necessarily going to sell. And we're in a position to do that now because we've managed to make an income for both of us through our commercial work. But it feels creatively like it would be really good fun just to do something and stick it in a gallery and not have to sell it.
Do you have any questions from the audience? It's a big room.
Good morning, and thank you very much for your talk. The things that you sell seem to help other people shape their own reality. Whether it's club clothes in Liverpool or if it's jewellery and prints now, you're helping people shape the way the world sees them. Does that bring a responsibility with it? Do you think about that when you're working?
Yeah, it does. I try not to think about it, to be honest, because I'm the kind of person that could get really bogged down with worrying about the responsibilities of the things that we make. So at the point at which it leaves the studio, I try not to think about the responsibilities that go with it, because I spend a lot of time thinking about them in the run-up to that. One of the things I do find particularly interesting with the jewellery side of things is that, and I think one of the reasons that the jewellery is successful is that I think there's not a lot of jewellery for women or for men for that matter, that it just kind of reflects what a lot of women or men want from jewellery these days. You know, jewellery in particular can be very overly complicated and kind of, I think there's a lot of women who want to be able to wear things that are kind of relatively inexpensive and easy to wear, and that's part of their identity. And I think what Kirsty did in the jewellery that she creates is kind of tapped into a very easy to wear stuff that people feel comfortable in. And so often when I'm talking to people who are buying the jewellery from us, it's that sense of comfort, you know, the pieces that they kind of just feel really easy to put on and wear all day, and that always feels great. But yeah, there is a responsibility, but I just try not to be encumbered by it.
How do you feel your surroundings, especially being in Fife in the middle of nowhere, affects your work?
Yeah, it's massive. It's massive mentally in terms of I kind of feel like we're slightly outside a scene, which is great. I mean, it does our heads in as well, that we're kind of constantly missing out on things, and we're a little bit out of the loop. But at the same time, we're not influenced by it particularly. So we kind of just do our own thing in this bubble, and it's amazing to go out and look at the sea, and look at big skies and fields and things. And again, it comes back to this idea of making space to think. I think that you can just walk outside of yourself and you can see things in a different way. It's curious, you know, that we both love kind of brutalist architecture, so we'll regularly go down to London and look at these big tower blocks, and they'll inform our work, but it equally is informed by the fields and the colours and things like that. And I mean, Kirsty's work, which is, you know, more reductive and more brutal than my work, is completely inspired by where we live, but it doesn't look remotely like it. And I think it's quite interesting kind of developing that level of abstraction, but you know, it's still very much rooted in where we live.
Fife's not the middle of nowhere as well. I grew up there and I'm fine.
No, it's not the middle of anything anyway, is it? It's the edge. It's less about being in the middle of nowhere. That's a kind of an offhand way to describe it. I think what I like is being on the edge of places. So when I was in Liverpool, you know, we were by the water as well. And I think there's a sense when you live on the edge of somewhere that you can go and you can look out at that edge and never quite be sure what's beyond it. And there's a certain way of thinking that comes with that, which I think is quite interesting.
Hi there. How do you find your customers?
As in our kind of retailers? Well, to be honest, we don't do an awful lot of looking. They tend to come to us, and it stems from when Kirsty started out as Lovely Pigeon. She looked into the kind of places where she'd want her work to be, and then she sent out about 40 packs of product. So she sent 40 packs out with cards and jewellery and things like that. And it was picked up by a couple of big galleries. And as soon as they'd taken it up, it created confidence in the product. I think that then made it appealing to other people. And if you build up a portfolio of a few kind of good shops, it looks like a relatively easy win to a buyer. And so most of our inquiries are kind of inbound, and very occasionally we'll see an amazing shop somewhere and we'll go and stick cards in front of them and say, we'd love to work with you. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. I mean, we have, we've lost some amazing stockists in the transition from Lovely Pigeon to Tom Pigeon who don't like the new work as much as they like the old work. So we'll try and win them back.
I think that's all we have time for, so thank you so much. Let's thank Pete again for his talk.